So far, we have looked at the free electrons in a metal using a classical approach as given by the Drude model, assumptions of the Drude model. And then we moved over to the Sommerfeld model, which uses the results of the Fermi-Dirac statistics, in particular the indistinguishability of electrons. And that helped us understand some of the difficulties of the Drude model. But there are still many unanswered questions, and we shall try to answer some of them in the future classes. So in particular, we still don't know what is the source of electrical resistance in a metal. Why does the resistivity depend on the magnetic field? Although according to the Hall effect as within the Drude model, it should not. The resistivity does depend on the magnetic field, and we don't know why. And the mean free path of electrons increases at low temperatures and it becomes very large at lower temperatures. So why does this happen? And as we saw, the Hall coefficient for some metals is positive, the thermopower of some metals is positive, and this means that they have positive charge carriers. How can free electrons in a metal have positive charge? How is this possible? Then we also saw that the electronic specific heat at high temperatures, that is room temperatures, was quite low, but it's not so low that we can't measure it. But why is it that we can't measure it at high temperatures, and why are we able to measure it suddenly at low temperatures? And also we looked at the Wiedemann-Franz law, which is basically the ratio of the thermal conductivity to electrical conductivity, and it is proportional to the temperature. But it is not obeyed, that form of the law is not obeyed at all temperatures. Particularly in between high and low temperatures, it's not obeyed. Why does this happen? There are so many of them. These are just some questions. Then if you look at the AC electrical conductivity, for a free electron gas, it is supposed to be a perfect reflector of electromagnetic radiation up to a certain frequency, and after that it will transmit it. That's the plasma frequency. But real metals don't behave like this. They don't exhibit this nice cutoff. Why does this happen? How do we know which electrons are conduction electrons and which electrons are valence electrons? Which electrons are core electrons? Conduction electrons are valence electrons, and which electrons are core electrons, which we treat as part of the nucleus. How do we know for a given solid these many electrons are conduction electrons, these many electrons are core electrons? How do we make this distinction? And then how do we distinguish between a metal and a non-metal? Of course, we study in school and about band gap and so on, but there must be a much more fundamental way to distinguish a metal, a non-metal, semiconductor, etc. How do we do all that? So there are plenty of unanswered questions which we can't answer every question in detail in this course, but we shall try to do as many as possible. So when our theory is not matching with experiment, that means that some of the approximations or all of the approximations that we have made are incorrect, or we must relax those approximations as best as we can. We can't get rid of all approximations, then the problem will become too complex. So what are the approximations we have made so far? We are working under the free electron approximations. This means that the electron does not interact with the ion at all. In fact, we have not even considered the presence of the ion so far. The ion means ion is the nucleus plus the core electrons. We are also working in the independent electron approximation. That means we are assuming that the electrons do not interact with each other. Then the Drude model also assumes something called the relaxation time approximation. The relaxation time approximation means that you assume that the relaxation time is independent of the electron's position and velocity. Or what it means is the electronic distribution after the collision is independent of the electronic distribution at the time of the collision. Now, you can't get rid of all these approximations, then the problem will become very complex. Independent electron approximation is a very good approximation for the kind of physics that we are going to study. So we shall not remove this. But if you want to study things like magnetism then you cannot work with independent electron approximation. Removing this will be the subject of condensed matter 2, which is an elective course for you. So we shall not touch the independent electron approximation in this course. With respect to the free electron approximation, we have to recognize the presence of the ions. So we shall do this in 2 steps. One, we shall recognize that the ions form a lattice. That is, the ions are not arranged randomly in a solid. They form a regular lattice, regular network called the Bravais lattice, which we shall discuss presently. But the ions are not stable. They are actually vibrating. There are lattice vibrations. So we shall remove the free electron approximation in 2 stages. One, we shall recognize the presence of the ions. We shall study the properties of the static lattice. That is, we shall assume that the lattice is not vibrating. Then we shall introduce the electrons and see what happens to the dynamics of the electron. Then, as a second stage, we shall introduce lattice vibrations and study lattice vibrations. What are the effects of lattice vibrations on electrons? This is something that we shall not deal with in this course. That will again be part of condensed matter 2. But we shall only talk about the static lattice and the limitations of the static lattice in this course. We shall also discuss the dynamics of the lattice vibrations without introducing the electrons. Then the relaxation time approximation for a very large extent is a very good approximation, but we have to understand why it is a good approximation. We shall try to do as much as possible of this. Depending on the availability of time, we shall try to remove the relaxation time approximation and see where it takes us in the future classes. So we are going to start studying crystal lattices from now on, and I would like to point out that conventionally, at least for those who have done their BSc, they will know people spend a lot of time on crystal lattices. They talk about face-centered cubic, body-centered cubic, primitive cell, primitive vectors, this and that and so on. That is not my aim here. My aim is to discuss the dynamics of electrons, discuss band structure, electronic band structure, and we shall only talk about crystal lattices to the extent that it is necessary to understand electron dynamics. So we shall not be spending a lot of time on this. Some aspects of this portion will be left as an assignment. I shall explain what this will be left as an assignment to you. So we shall start with what is known as a Bravais lattice. The Bravais lattice is basically an infinite array of discrete points which can be generated by a vector of this form, where the vectors, A1, A2, A3 are called the primitive vectors of the Bravais lattice, and the N1, N2 and N3 are positive or negative integers. And the most important quality of a Bravais lattice is you can sit on any point in the lattice. The arrangement and orientation of the lattice will look the same. That is, you can sit here and the lattice will look the same everywhere around you. You can sit here and the lattice will look the same everywhere around you, and so on. And given this vector, this form of the Bravais lattice vector, you can, from any point, you can go to any other point Q or P using this by appropriately changing the N1, N2 or N3. So the most important point is it's an infinite array of discrete points, and you can go to any point on the lattice. The arrangement and orientation will look the same. So if you look at this honeycomb structure, this is not a Bravais lattice, because if you sit on P, you get one view, but if you sit on Q, you get the same view, but if you sit on R, you don't get the same view. The view of the lattice from P and R are different, and therefore it's not a Bravais lattice. This is a simple 3-dimensional cubic lattice, and you can see the vectors A1, A2 and A3 there. And you can create a small cube from this vectors A1, A2 and A3, and that's called the unit cell. You can basically use this unit cell and generate the entire 3-dimensional lattice. And if you look at it, the unit cell will contain one Bravais lattice point, because there are 8 corners and each corner will have 1/8 of the Bravais lattice point. So if so the entire cube will contain one Bravais lattice point. That's called a primitive cell. Of course, technically the Bravais lattice is an infinite array, but for a solid we need a finite array, and therefore we will assume that these n1, n2 and n3 will range from 0 to some capital N1, capital N2 and capital N3, with the total number of lattice points being given by the product capital N1 into N2 into N3. Now, I would like you to go to chapter 4 of Ashcroft and Mermin, and there is a section called Further Illustration and Examples. So I have just described the basic Bravais lattice to you. That chapter in Ashcroft and Mermin gives you many other examples like simple cubic, body-centered cubic, face-centered cubic, hexagonal lattice and so on. I would like you to read the rest of the chapter and make notes. That notes you can hand in as your assignment. That's all. Now, I would like you to understand that we will only be considering the translational symmetry of the Bravais lattice in this course. Translational symmetry means wherever you go, the Bravais lattice will look identical. You can move from one point to the other, it will look identical. That's the translational symmetry. In addition, a Bravais lattice can have symmetries like rotational symmetry, inversion symmetry, reflection symmetries and so on. We are not going to study that in this course. Now, for any given Bravais lattice, you can construct a Fourier transform of that lattice called the reciprocal lattice. So, if I have a Bravais lattice given by this vector capital R, I can now think of plane waves. We have seen plane waves for free electrons. This is the general form of the plane wave that we saw. And I would like to know what plane waves have the same periodicity as that of the Bravais lattice. The reason I want to know this is because I am going to take electronic plane waves and put them on a Bravais lattice. So I want to study the physics of that. So I want to know what plane waves will have the periodicity of the Bravais lattice. So suppose I define a set of wave vectors given by a plane wave of this form, where e power I capital K dot R, and the definition of a Bravais lattice is the Bravais lattice is a set of wave vectors that has the same periodicity of the Bravais lattice. What does that mean? So suppose I have this plane wave. I am physically at some position small r. Now suppose I go from small r to another position small r plus capital R, from r to r plus r. Because it's a Bravais lattice, it will look the same. It will look completely identical. So these two should be the same. That's just the property of the Bravais lattice, and this means that e power I capital K dot capital R should be 1, and therefore that is the definition of the Bravais lattice. So it's a set of wave vectors. It is very important to appreciate this all time. The Bravais lattice is a set of wave vectors. Many people forget this. It's a set of wave vectors that has the same periodicity as that of the Bravais lattice, and that's called the reciprocal lattice. So this is the governing condition of the reciprocal lattice. So for every Bravais lattice, there will be one reciprocal lattice, and the reciprocal lattice is sometimes also called the Dirac lattice. So you can think of the reciprocal lattice as a Fourier transform of the Bravais lattice. So if I have a function f of r, I can write a simple Fourier transform in this manner, and the Bravais lattice has the condition that f of r plus capital R is just f of r, and if I impose that on the Fourier transform, I will get this, and I'll simply get back the same f of r, and this again gives me the condition, this condition of the reciprocal lattice. So that tells me that the reciprocal lattice is basically a Fourier transform of the Bravais lattice, and since it's a Fourier transform, the reciprocal lattice will also have the property of a Bravais lattice. What is the defining property of a Bravais lattice is you go from one point to the other, the lattice will look the same. So if you go from one point to the other in the reciprocal lattice, the reciprocal lattice will look the same. So it is also a Brovai lattice. It also has a property of a Brovai lattice. And if you take the reciprocal of the reciprocal lattice, it is like inverting the Fourier transform once again, and therefore you will get back the Brovai lattice again. So given this vector which defines the Brovai lattice, this vector defines the reciprocal lattice. So again, k1, k2 and k3 will be integers. The vectors b1, b2 and b3 are the primitive vectors in the reciprocal lattice, just like vectors a1, a2 and a3 are the primitive vectors in the direct lattice. Let me say that again. I hope I didn't mess it up. K1, K2, K3 are integers. Vectors b1, b2 and b3 are the primitive vectors in the reciprocal lattice, just like vectors a1, a2 and a3 are primitive vectors in the Brovai lattice or the direct lattice. Now this is the governing condition which relates the two vectors, and one can show that if you take b1, b2 and b3 of this form, you can show that the two vectors satisfy this condition. That's something that I will leave you to show. It's not of fundamental importance to our course. I'm not too worried about it. That's just a manner of constructing. That's all. You can see why you have the denominator as this. That just gives me the volume of the primitive cell. So now we come to the idea of a primitive cell. So given a Brovai lattice, I can define a area for a two-dimensional lattice or a volume which contains exactly one Brovai lattice point. So in the two-dimensional case, I can construct it like this, or I can construct it like this, and this is called a primitive cell. It contains exactly one lattice point, and I can just shift this primitive cell all over the Brovai lattice and generate it without any overlap. And this is the primitive cell of a lattice called the face-centered cubic lattice. So in a face-centered cubic lattice, you basically have Brovai lattice points on the edges, and you also have lattice points on every face. So on this face there's one, on this face there's one, on this face there's one, here, here and here and so on. So given this face-centered cubic lattice, one can create a primitive cell shown by the gray box, and you can see that the gray box contains one lattice point because each edge has got each edge contributes 1/8 of the Brovai lattice, and therefore this totally contains one lattice point. Therefore that's the primitive cell of the face-centered cubic structure. Then there's something called the Wigner-Seitz cell. So in the Wigner-Seitz cell, you basically so given any lattice point, you can you basically draw lines to the nearest lattice point, and then you take the perpendicular bisectors, and the area or the volume bounded by the perpendicular bisectors becomes the Wigner-Seitz cell. It's defined as the smallest area or volume that contains a primitive cell. Similarly, you can have a Wigner-Seitz cell in 3 dimensions as well. In 2 dimensions, it's a line. In 3 dimensions, it will become a plane. This is called the body-centered cubic. So there are Brovai lattice points on the edges. Then there is one Brovai lattice point in the center of the cube. And so for that structure, you can define a you can define a Wigner-Seitz cell like this. Now, you can draw a Brovai lattice point. You can draw a Brovai lattice. Excuse me. Let me say that again. Sorry, I got confused. I had just said that the reciprocal lattice is also a Brovai lattice. So if you can draw a Wigner-Seitz cell in a Brovai lattice, you can draw a Wigner-Seitz cell in the reciprocal lattice as well. So the Wigner-Seitz cell in the reciprocal lattice is called the first Brillouin zone, and this is something that we will be reading again and again. So I will not talk more about this now. The first Brillouin zone plays a very important role in the dynamics of electrons, and it is just the Wigner-Seitz cell drawn in the reciprocal lattice using the same idea. I will not discuss this more here. We will come back to it as needed later on. So for the second part of your assignment, I would like you to find the reciprocal lattice vectors for the Bravais lattice examples mentioned in chapter 4. In chapter 4, like I said, there are many Bravais lattice examples: simple cubic, face-centered cubic, hexagonal structure, body-centered cubic, whatever. For all those Bravais lattice examples, please find the reciprocal lattice vectors using this relationship. The primitive vectors for the Bravais lattice A1, A2, A3 are given. Using this relation, find out B1, B2 and B3 for the different Bravais lattice examples mentioned in chapter 4. That will be the second part of your assignment. Now, given any Bravais lattice, you can draw any number of lattice planes. So you can draw a family of lattice planes. So that's one family of lattice planes. That's another family of lattice planes. So a lattice plane is basically it's a two-dimensional Bravais lattice, and a family of planes means that you have equally spaced planes. And if I give you one set of planes, that means all the lattice points are available in that set of planes. Whether I give you this set of planes or this set of planes, you can generate the entire Bravais lattice with this set of planes, and it contains all the points, all the Bravais lattice points. And each plane is also a Bravais lattice in of itself. Now, there is a relationship between the family of Bravais lattice planes and the reciprocal vector, the reciprocal lattice vector, and so we are going to understand how that relationship comes about. So, given any plane wave, you can draw a vector k, and what this expression basically means is that that plane wave is going to be the direction of that plane wave is going to be that wave vector will have a family of planes perpendicular to it. So I can draw a plane perpendicular to this wave vector, and that equation of the plane will be k dot r is going to be a constant. That's the essential definition of a plane wave. So for a plane wave, those planes will represent the wave fronts. That's the wave vector, and I can draw a plane perpendicular to that vector k, and the equation of the plane will be k dot r. So I now can draw a family of planes separated by a distance lambda, and the k will be related to the lambda given by this. So lambda equal to 2 pi by k will be the periodicity. That's the plane separation. So for any given plane wave, I can draw a family of planes with a periodicity of lambda. This is a general idea of a plane wave. Now let's apply this to the reciprocal lattice. Now suppose I have a plane wave given by e power I k dot r, where this is a capital K, and a priori let's assume that we don't know whether it is a reciprocal lattice vector or not. So given this, then this plane wave is you can draw a set of so this is K, capital K, and you can draw a set of planes, and the k dot r will be the equation of these planes, and the separation will be lambda equal to 2 pi by capital K. Let's say this separation is equal to some d. So I can now write this capital K vector as 2 pi by d times some unit vector n cap. Now let us assume that these planes are lattice planes, right? Bravais lattice planes. One of those lattice planes will contain the point r equal to 0, right? So when r equal to 0, this will obviously become 1. So this means that e power I k dot r is 1 for that plane, but it must also be the same for all the planes, because of the condition that once you define a wave front, then it will be the same equation will be applicable for all the planes in that wave front. So if obviously there will be some plane with the point r equal to 0, and for that obviously e power I k dot r will be 1, but that means that because we are considering a plane wave, e power I k dot r equal to 1 for all the planes. But if I look at all the planes will contain all the Bravais lattice points. I just said that. That means this is now valid. This condition is now valid for all the Bravais lattice points. Then automatically the vector k will become a reciprocal lattice vector. And this k equal to 2 pi by d is the shortest periodicity that you can think of, because if I change the periodicity more or less from than d, then this condition will not be satisfied anymore. So what this means is that given a set of Bravais lattice planes, I can define a reciprocal lattice vector perpendicular to it. So any family of Bravais lattice planes, separated by a distance d, if I give you any direction, any family of Bravais lattice planes separated by a distance d, I can define a reciprocal lattice vector. It's not any vector, it's a reciprocal lattice vector. It's not any wave vector, it's a special reciprocal lattice vector perpendicular to the family of these planes, and I can define the shortest length of this reciprocal vector as 2 pi by d, where d is the separation. So now again, if I go to this family of planes, so I have this family of planes with a separation d, whether it is this family or that family, I can now define a reciprocal lattice vector perpendicular to this family or perpendicular to that family, and the shortest distance of that reciprocal lattice vector will be 2 pi by d. So reciprocal lattice vectors can be used to specify the orientation of lattice planes. So instead of drawing huge pictures like this, difficult pictures, and saying that's one family, I can just say I have a reciprocal lattice vector perpendicular to this family given by this equation. I have another reciprocal lattice vector given by another equation, and that is enough to specify the orientation of lattice planes. So we can specify a lattice plane by using the shortest reciprocal lattice vector normal to that plane. That's what we just saw. So let us say that vector is given by this, that reciprocal lattice vector is given by that. Then we say that the lattice plane has got Miller indices h, k and l. So these prefactors for the primitive vectors in the reciprocal space h, k and l represent that lattice plane, and you say they are called Miller indices. So given any lattice plane with a spacing d, you can specify a reciprocal lattice vector, and the shortest reciprocal lattice vector will be having the distance 2 pi by d. And suppose that reciprocal lattice vector can be written in this form, where h, k and l are some integers, then I say that a particular family of lattice planes has got Miller indices h, k and l, and it's easy enough to find what these h, k and l are, either by calculation or by experiment. We shall talk more about this in the next class.